you're here with us in this moment and in this place. Open us to know and feel your presence. Amen.
Amen.
Well, good morning, everyone. On this Joe Kane Parade Day, it's nice to have you here with us. My wife, Cynthia, likes to take our dog, Zoe, for walks. It is for her a chance to feel God in the outdoors. Cynthia especially likes to look at all those old live oak trees with their huge branches stretching out in all directions, reaching out and down, sometimes all the way to the ground. She says those trees and branches remind her of God. Also reaching out in all directions, including toward us. In gazing upon those old oak trees, Cynthia is given a direct, immediate experience of God's presence in creation. I would bet most, if not all of you, have had some kind of similar experience of God being present in nature. Think about outdoor places like the beach, a sunset, flowing water of streams or rivers, walking through a damp, dark forest, gazing at a star-filled sky. Aren't those times full of wonder, of awe, of having received a gift from God, our source? This experience of God in creation is in fact an ancient way of prayer. For the people of Ireland, well before the time of Jesus, experiencing God in nature was their primary way of prayer and of knowing God. Western Christianity found its way to the British Isles, including Ireland, in the 6th century or so, and within a century had converted the people there to Christianity, bringing scripture and tradition as the primary source of worship. This created a tension between the native Celts and St. Augustine of Canterbury and his Roman visitors. And while the ancient practice of finding God in nature was suppressed, it never completely disappeared. What became known as Celtic spirituality continued as a way of worship with its emphasis on finding Christ in the natural world. For them, there were two sacred books, the book of Scripture and the book of creation, and both were holy. They used the expression thin place to describe those encounters we have with God in nature when the veil that sometimes separates us from God becomes thin. The divine seeps through the physical, and creation becomes a theophany. While Celtic spirituality was not a big part of Western Christianity, it persisted. St. Francis of Assisi in the 12th century, who saw the transformational power of love's presence within all creation, continued in this tradition. And there has been a resurgence of Celtic spirituality over the past several decades. So I guess you could say Cynthia's experience of God through those old oak trees and of your sense of God's presence within nature in your own experiences are throwbacks to that old form of prayer that the Celts and others used for millennia. What is it about this created world that attracts us so? I think it is one way God invites us to find God. Since that moment when God emptied God's self into creation, we and all created things have been part of one another, unified by our connection to God, literally physically made of the same elements as the stars, and God is in all of it. I think that is why we feel that wonder and awe, because in gazing upon created things, we are gazing upon the divine within them. Our scripture readings today remind us of this experience of God in creation. In Exodus, Moses goes up the mountain and sees God in that mountain within cloud and fire. The cloud both hides and reveals God's glory to Moses. And the scene suggests an awesome volcanic mountain. From Psalm 99, God spoke to them in the pillar of cloud, and extol the Lord our God and worship at his holy mountain. From 2 Peter, we ourselves heard this voice come from heaven while we were with him on the holy mountain, in reference to Peter's presence at the transfiguration of Jesus in the gospel for today. We see in Matthew 17, Jesus taking James and Peter and his brother John and leading them up a high mountain by themselves. And then in verse 5, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them. And from the cloud a voice said, "This is my Son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." Jesus, like Moses before him, encounters God within a cloud on a mountain. And let's look at what other scripture says about creation. The Bible is loaded with references. The creation stories in Genesis. God saw everything that God had made, and indeed it was very good. From Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows God's handiwork. From Psalm 24, the earth is the Lord's and all that is in it. From Job, animals will teach you about God's creation. And then in Paul's letter to the Romans, ever since the creation of the world, God's eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood through the things God made. And what have our theologians said about creation? From Alexander John Scott, creation is a transparency through which the light of God can be seen. From Martin Luther, God writes the gospel, not in the Bible alone, but also on trees and the flowers and the clouds and stars. And from Thomas Aquinas, Revelation comes in 2 volumes, the Bible and nature. Well, Scripture also both calls us to be good stewards of creation and instructs us on how to care for it. Again, in Genesis, we are created part of the created order, not separate from it. And our first calling by God is to be caretakers of creation. From the prophet Hosea, a warning. Reckless destruction of nature is a sign of estrangement from God. There is no knowledge of God in the land. Therefore the land mourns, and all who live in it languish. Together with the wild animals and the birds of the air, even the fish of the sea are perishing. And finally from Revelation, hurt not the earth, neither the sea nor its trees. Ominous warnings? I think so. And yet, having been told by Scripture of the consequences of not being good stewards, we are now facing a huge problem with God's creation. We are in the midst of a crisis that threatens all of us, and which, if not confronted, will radically change our lives, but more so the lives of our children and grandchildren. The crisis is climate change. Creation is sacred, and I believe that we are called by God to do whatever we can to help reverse the course of this change on our home, the earth. I believe it is our moral imperative. Conversation about climate change can be so divisive and threatening. I think it's easy to stop watching what is going on around us. It's easy to turn our eyes and attention away from the reality of rising temperatures, the melting polar ice cap, rising sea levels, increasing severity of storms like Hurricane Michael we experienced on the Gulf Coast last year, more severe flooding, destruction of our rainforests, extinction of so many animal species, and the starvation of hundreds of thousands of people, especially those already living in poverty. For those people, this is environmental injustice. It is easy to throw up our hands and to give up because it all seems so overwhelming and hopeless. And some deny that climate change is real. Perhaps some of you feel that way. If so, please know I am not blaming you or demeaning you. I know that some people are very concerned about climate change and others less so. I would simply encourage you to stay informed and to look around. I personally am convinced that it is very real and that we have to act to address it. What can we do? Let me assure you that there is hope. One of the 3 initiatives that our presiding Bishop Michael Curry established shortly after his ordination was Creation Care. Our own diocese of the Central Gulf Coast has joined this ministry of Creation Care. This is the 50th anniversary of our diocese, our Jubilee year, and each month of this year has a theme. The theme for May is Creation Stewardship. As many of you know, we have a green team here at All Saints. It's the environmental care component of the Action Committee that Mary Roberts started last fall. And we are now part of a larger interfaith coalition called Gulf Coast Creation Care, a faith-based climate action alliance. Our mission is to enhance awareness of climate change, to stress our scriptural calling to address it, as we've seen this morning, to identify our complicity with climate change in the way we live our lives, and to make the appropriate changes in our lifestyles, to identify the powers and principalities such as the fossil fuel industry and others that contribute so much to the problem, and to take action to help reverse it. We will celebrate the 50th anniversary of Earth Day on April 18th in Fairhope. And here at All Saints, we've designated May 17th as Creation Care Sunday. Our liturgy that Sunday, similar to today's, will address our call to care for creation. And following worship, we will host a symposium on creation care, inviting the entire diocese as well as members of our Gulf Coast Creation Care Alliance. More information on that will follow. And on the weekend of November 7th and 8th, the Alliance will host a symposium to be held at Spring Hill College with Jim Antal as our speaker. Antal is a theologian and national spokesperson on climate change for the United Church of Christ and author of the book which our adult education class read, Climate Church, Climate World. The hope I mentioned is in the numerous opportunities that we as individuals and as groups, including parishes, have to get involved. It is so important for all of us to recognize that we are all part of this shared humanity, all created by God, all children of God. This earth is home to all of us. We breathe the same air. We are literally all in this together. Church leaders and their congregations have historically played a major role in nearly every social transformation. For example, the role of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. in the Civil Rights Movement. And I believe the church as a faith-based voice can also play a big role in addressing this current environmental problem. And I also believe that it is indeed a crisis which requires immediate attention. In our hearts, we know what is possible. And in the words of Jim Antal, we hope for a better future, for a more beautiful world, a more balanced way of living, a deeper connection to all things alive and yet to be born, an imagination sufficient to accomplish what seems to be impossible. Let me close this morning with a blessing by Norman Habel from Earth Gospel, a guide to prayer for God's creation. May our eyes be blessed that we may see God's beauty in the star-swept sky. May our ears be blessed that we may hear God calling us in the wind. May our hearts be blessed that we may feel the love of God in the warmth of the sun. May God, our Creator, Redeemer, and Sanctifier, bless us with each life-renewing breath we take. Amen.